Okay, Debbie, thanks very much. So, John, can I come back to you and just let's the three of us have a conversation together? What Debbie described there at the beginning of this mobilization of public effort, a lot of it voluntary. I mean, are we seeing a little bit of David Cameron's big society, which is one of the questions that's come up? You know, those of us that work in the sort of think tank world would describe some of that as co-production and mobilizing capital. What's your view on that point that Debbie was making?
I think we have seen a lot of willingness and a lot of actual activity generated and invested into community activities, neighborhood activities, the expansion, as Debbie put it, to fill gaps. I think the challenge around all of this is you either use jargon like co-production or use platitudes like David Cameron did, which is big society. All of us, we know that basically law and order is kept in this country not by the police. Once every 7 years, the police go past a crime being committed in their average life. It's generated by all of us behaving well to each other and not committing crimes. It's the social norms. I think the powerful norms that there are. The difficulty is if we go back to what I was saying at the beginning of was the harsh light that's been shone on some lives, you know, the fact that there has had to be a fight and a Premier League footballer involved in getting free school meals provided over holidays. The fact that there have been these disputes about people really at the bottom of the pile in all of this, and that there's been every huge crisis of this nature hits unevenly, and there are industries which have been wiped out, like most of the support, like any industry, like the arts, creative world, subsists on a chain of subcontracting and small independent contractors. Many of the people have seen everything collapse out of there, and the number of writers and actors and lighting engineers that I know who've gone to work in supermarkets or to work for Amazon because those are the jobs that are available. So we have a situation where we've seen something, we want to keep it, but we don't want to keep the thing that caused it. We don't want the crisis to be maintained. We want the community structures, which is really a bit why I said, if we're going to reorganize government, yes, devolve, but don't stop the devolution with the mayor of Greater Manchester. There must be something that goes down lower and lower to local people, so they can, they take pride in their parks, and they take pride in their communities. How do you put power in their hands and enables them individually and collectively to? And that to me comes back to the much mocked but very much loved parish councils, where small amounts of money spent on the things which absolutely impact on your immediate environment, whether it's the park benches, the street lighting, control over them can be a very civilizing way, because it's just the reassurance. It's just that, areas with good neighbors don't have abandoned, burnt out cars in them, because if one is ever abandoned and burnt out, they're reported immediately. Areas with poor social infrastructure and lack of trust, that's where things get done, because people look at it and they go, nothing will be done about it.
And there has been a strong trend in local government to try and get down to that level, and trying to sort of get back to a level where people know who, if you like, who's in charge or who's their representative, without going down to the level. Debbie, do you, in the feedback you're getting from your members, where some of them will have seen, a rising willingness in the public to participate, to support, to engage, even with the limitations in COVID, can you think of examples where people are really thinking this can carry forward back into normal life? I hesitate to use that term.
I think that's something that they're exploring all the time. But I think it's the practicalities of making that happen on a long-term basis, which is going to be one of the challenges that they're facing. I certainly think that from what I hear, I mean, we always used to talk about customer-centric services, but I think it probably is more that now than ever. They are thinking, actually, these people out there have got a role to play, and they have got a lot of valuable input to make into how these services can be delivered more effectively moving forward. So I think that will be one of the really good points that will come out of this. And it's relatively easy. It's one of the easier ones, I would think, to actually put into practice and sustain.
When I started off, I referred to Roy Griffiths and Peter Levine coming into the Thatcher government in the early 80s. And that was because there was a perception that neither in the business sector nor in the public sector there was any kind of budget discipline. People would just go over budget and somebody would pick up the tab. But one of the questions we've got here is, are we in a period where so much money has been thrown at public services that the argument for fiscal and budgetary discipline has been lost? So all the things that Mrs. Thatcher worked away to instill, has that been diluted by just the spectacle of government being able to find money that it spent a decade saying wasn't available to the public? John, what's your view on that? You must have come across this debate.
Look, I think one very brief observation on organisation, then onto the money. What is striking in the whole of the pandemic management across the world is the West has failed and the East has succeeded. Vietnam has had 10 deaths from COVID. Vietnam. But it's not just Vietnam, it's Korea. It's not just Korea, it's Singapore. It's not just Singapore, it's Taiwan, it's China, it's New Zealand and Australia. There's something about the governmental model over there, the Asia Pacific government model, which may be that a lot of those governments have been founded relatively recently. You know, we sit on foundations that are Victorian. In terms of the money, I have to agree. I think that something psychologically is broken. There's not a single government minister willing to go out and say that we shouldn't keep the universal credit uplift or we shouldn't pay for free school meals and holidays because we can't afford it. That argument is gone. We can't afford it. It was false. The austerity that was imposed on us was false, and there's been a psychological rebound from that. The notion that we can spend anything we want on everything we want, really the answer to that is the Humber Bridge. That bridge will never be value for money. And yes, you can build infrastructure and you can employ people doing infrastructure, and firms can profit from infrastructure. But I've been in many meetings where somebody has said, but it pays for itself over 30 years, this public investment, to which the Treasury official always replies correctly, everything pays for itself in 30 years. You still have to choose. And I think that's the danger of a consensus, is that if you don't get the grit, you don't get the choice. You don't get the grit, you don't get the oyster. There's grit in the oyster that creates the pearl in the oyster, I should have said. And localizing. Grenfell is the end of a localization process, whereby Kensington and Chelsea thought it was a good idea to put their tenants in charge of their housing. Yes, that's probably a good principle. But can tenants run 17,000 houses? Clearly, they won't run them as well as professional housing officers and councils and housing departments and housing directors. So the difficulty about consensus, which I welcome as Debbie welcomes, the difficulty is if you don't get the clash of an analysis of something that goes, let's question this hard enough to go. Somebody should have questioned devolving 17,000 houses to a tenant management in Kensington and Chelsea. Somebody has to ask, what if interest rates rise by a small amount? At what point does this debt become unsustainable? Yes, we can borrow all the time, and we keep finding boundaries beyond which we can keep on going. But we've had two crises. 10 years ago, the global financial crisis. Now this one. There may well be another shock coming. We were without the pandemic, we were heading for a slowdown in the Chinese economy. So I do think a debate about that, but you can see on the Tory benches, there's nobody saying, but spending's not the solution. You know, the old Ronald Reagan
how
quote,
does that, Debbie, how does
not the solution, government's the problem.
Yeah.
Spending's not the solution.
Debbie, how does that then translate into what it's going to be like for managers over the coming period? So we heard from John that inside organizations and corporations, they've realized that they have to live and respond to the values of their staff, not just for diversity, but what they believe their company should be and their business and their public authority should be doing, including how it treats its staff. When that comes up against the difficult budget decisions that are going to be made, aren't they going to be facing a whole audience of value-loaded people who are not going to want to make those choices? I mean, isn't that the problem that many people in the public service faced in the late 70s? Am I being overly pessimistic, Debbie?
No, I think people have got a heightened sense of that now, the employees, especially of the values and their sense of purpose. But equally, so have it's a strange thing, because the public sector has a finite pot of money, and they can, it doesn't matter what level of service the people on the ground want. At some point you have to say, no, we can't afford to do that. So there are difficult choices all the time, and that will be one of the challenges moving forward. But I think the public sector rose to it in was it 2012, when we had that first period of austerity and there wasn't the money and tough choices had to be made. They rose to that challenge really well, and that did bring about some quite interesting developments that enabled people to carry on delivering less money and to meet the values of the organisations and what they felt values of the organisations were. But I do think there will come a point where you can only do so much, and my gut feeling is that the public sector needs almost a radical transformation of how it's set in silos at the moment almost, and there's an awful lot of waste and overlap and opportunity for improvement between those silos and how they work together across government. So I think it'll take something really radical to maybe in the future to be able to meet the budget constraints that we're faced with.
So if you were both, as a last question to you both, if you were thinking about which sectors of industry or management you would advise a young relative to go into, as I would have advised people to go into health services, not social care, health services in the late 80s, and they would have had a pretty stellar career in a difficult but tolerable environment. Where would you advise people to go? I know that my junior relatives are all looking at the environment. They're looking at building windmills, recycling plastic. Some of them are showing more interest in science and technology. But if you wanted to pick an area where there were real management challenges lined up with your values, and not likely to be reversed or diverted into dysfunctional crises, where would you recommend that they look? John, you first. Go on.
Okay, it has to be climate change for all kinds of reasons, because tackling the challenge of climate change and the climate crisis involves so many things. It could be in communications, it could be in engineering, it could be in agriculture, it can be in aid and development. It will take you around the world. It can be in solar panels, it can be in re-engineering the energy supply chain. So I think, if you want to go somewhere that's going to be exciting, it's going to match your values, it's going to change the world for the better, and is irreplaceably essential, the climate area. Okay,
so John's stolen the best one where people can get a purpose that Debbie mentioned. Debbie, where would you, I think nobody's advising accountancy and law, by the way. Debbie, where would you advise somebody to go?
Well, I was going to say the same, actually, but from a slightly different angle, because if you get into that area, then you're into things like the cars, the technology, the lighting, the heating, the whole of the infrastructure. And certainly when I was at the combined authority, some of the really interesting work there was around place and how to move people effectively around cities and things like that. And it was just fascinating.
Okay, well, place and travel to work areas, that brings me back to memories of a famous report that was launched in, I think, 2007, which was the genesis of some of the elected mayors. How do we make people connect with place? So perhaps you look at organisations that have a firm commitment to place and to making change in that place. So to Debbie Simpson, the Chief Exec of ICIPS, and to John McTernan, a broadcaster, writer, former and continuing advisor to many governments, thank you very much. This has been the first of 5 broadcasts that we've been doing, which will be in the countdown to the big ICIPS event in May. There is a call for papers out. Submit your ideas and let's see where we get to. And let's hope that there are people making beverage type plans as to how we come out the other side. So thank you both very much, and thank you for everyone who's watched. And this will be re-released in the next day or 2, and you can catch up on demand and share with your colleagues. My name's Neil Stewart. I'm the Editorial Director of City View, and thank you and good evening.